Hey everyone, it's Dr. Charlie Johnson, PT. Wanted to shoot a video to help you get back to life if you're dealing with back, butt, and or sciatica / hip problems. So there comes a point in time when you're dealing with these issues where you start to say to yourself, hey, I wonder how I can get back to X, Y, or Z, right? Something that you care about. It might be gardening. It might be something as simple as just walking or doing the stairs or vacuuming, doing the dishes, right? In the early phase of dealing with these problems, things are really hot and bothered often, and it's difficult. It kind of lays you up, right? It's difficult to do things, but you can get back to living life, and you can often do this naturally. So this is my specialty. My name is Dr. Charlie Johnson. If you're new to the channel, I'm a PT and an orthopedic specialist, and I help people with back, butt, and sciatica problems get back to life and heal their problems naturally. So you can either have pills, take shots, or get surgery, and or rely on someone else to move you or fix you, or you can learn to do it yourself. So I'm a teacher, and that's what I do. I want to teach you. So check out this private session I had with a coaching client, and hopefully it'll help you understand sort of the process for how you can get back to living your best life.
One other question about with the one yucky movement with the leg raise. I think there's a muscle weakness involved in that. At what stage do you start addressing those sorts of concerns?
Good. Okay, so look, this is important because if at some point, right, in the early phase, this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, right? When symptoms are really high, your overactivity and function is fairly low. And how aggressive you can be with your approach has to be fairly low because it has to match the fact that your symptoms are aggravated. Right. So, but this is where people mismatch it. Their symptoms are high and they start stretching things on the painful leg, start doing nerve glides or whatever. And then they send themselves into a flare up. Right. And they say it doesn't work, but it could have worked over here. You could have done what you did here over here when symptoms were very low and you could have been fine, but you mistimed it. Okay. So in the early phase, right. And I think this will make sense, right? You kind of focus on this idea of avoidance. Right? A little bit. You have some avoidance strategies. And then at the end, you have some kind of like, you kind of start to expose yourself more to that, which you're like, ooh, that was a little bit of yucky. Or I started, if this is, if this is the body, bad drawing. But, if you've got a problem, mostly say here, I don't know, on the one side, right? You start by working all around it. Okay, by kind of doing things above and below, but you kind of leave that area alone, right? That's a little bit of avoidance. And then you shift pain triggers, right? You do motions that reduce threat, right? And eventually what happens is generally over time, if you mentally and physically change the triggers, things start to go in the right direction. Okay, now I call this like crossing the chasm. All right, this idea of like at some point, right? This might be, I don't know, a few weeks in, it might be a few months in for some people, whatever. But when symptoms say get below a certain point, we'll call it, I don't know, a 50, right? When numbers get lower, right, overall, again, I don't know the exact number, but you start to get a sense of maybe where you're at, where you start to say, okay, I feel like I'm not perfect, right? But I'm getting there and I can see that I'm moving in the right direction. But at what point can I start to kind of challenge things? Is kind of what you're saying, right? So really my answer to that is if you're at that point, you're probably at a space where you can start to challenge it or very close to it. All right. So when your brain, because here's what it tells me, remember, this is just as much of a construct of the brain as it is the body. In the beginning, right, you weren't asking that question because your brain was just like, oh, heck no. Right? Like you can't do that. Like, why would you even ask that question about trying to challenge things on the painful side? Like that doesn't seem like it would be fun or sustainable. Right? But now your brain starts to say, oh, like I'm starting to ask questions of like, well, can I do this? Can I do this? That means automatically, if I knew nothing else about you, you didn't even put any numbers, I'd say she's got to be feeling a little bit better or going in the right direction at least. Okay. So again, what is that threshold where you cross over? Hard to say. It's not exactly like the same for everybody. But when you start to ask those questions, which shows me that the brain is starting to feel more safe and sees the way out, if you will, right? Then it's probably time to start considering what that looks like. So it's a good question. Okay.
Okay.
So in this exposure phase, right, you start to say, all right, in the beginning phase, in the first phase, I was avoidant of things. But now, right, I kind of need to confront right? And have some type of corrective experience with this problem. You could either have a setback if you come up to pain, or you can have a safe corrective experience. In the beginning, again, we do the avoidance stuff because we're worried about having the setback, right? At some point, though, we need to start to not avoid that thing, which was painful or aggravating, or just avoid the yucky thing altogether, because the avoidance of that thing, right, will be the thing that keeps fueling it at some point. You can get over fear of heights a little bit if you are super, super scared of them at a given point and you just avoid them. Eventually, your nervous system will calm down. But guess what happens when you come up to a ledge? You're going to be scared again. It's just going to come right back. So the idea is that at some point you need to switch over. If this was the avoidance, this is the exposure. You need to switch over and have safe experiences. Okay. So that being said, right, I think you're at the point where we can start to do that. All right. So now let me ask you this. You said, hey, Charlie, there's some weakness or something that seems different on that side. Can you just go into detail about that a little bit more?
Well, it seems like it's in the glute maximus area.
Okay.
That when I'm lifting, and also at the front of the hip, in the crease there, when I'm lifting the leg, and I don't know if it's, it also seems to be in the quad itself is tight on that side.
Cool. Okay, so let me ask you this. Is there anything, because we can talk about different ways to do it, right?
Okay.
Is there anything that you would say is like you've been wanting to try on, right? On your, because you're smart, you've been starting to apply the concept. Maybe something in your brain said, I wonder if I could do this to strengthen my leg, or I wonder if this would be okay, right? So I don't know. Look, if you haven't, that's totally cool, right? But if you have, right, if in your brain you said, I wonder if I could start to do this thing, what would that be? If you don't have anything, that's cool, because we can talk about options. But do you have anything in your brain there?
Well, I was noticing just getting up out of bed in the morning, because the clamshells weren't working for me before because I wasn't engaging the glute on that side. And I am able to squeeze it a little bit. So I'm wondering if clamshells might help, but I don't know if it's connected to all of this or not.
So here's the cool thing. Don't worry so much about like, is it connected, right?
Okay.
Instead, ask yourself, is it a yummy motion that is an entry point to me working the area that previously was threatening?
Yes.
It might not matter what you do, honestly. It might just matter that you come up with, right, some way that says, hey, look, when I do this thing, it doesn't hurt that bad. And I can do it a couple times, and I can say, wow, I'm actually feeling like I'm finally working this thing. What does that tell your brain? Wow, I'm actually maybe getting a little stronger, right? It doesn't matter if this is true or not. All you're doing is you're manipulating the signals, right? And you're breaking the cycle. You're trying to make yourself less fearful, worried, anxiety, break the movement pain relationship that you've been used to for so long, okay? So it could be clamshell, right? It could be, the one thing that I would say is, and again, it probably doesn't matter, but it's worth thinking about, right?
Okay.
How can we now tie in this concept of trying to get some strength back if we think she's at a phase where we can start to expose her to that, right? And make it meaningful for her. So what does Pat really need to do in life? Is the clamshell meaningful for her? Not really. She probably doesn't care about doing the clamshell unless she really likes to eat them or something, or she has some weird connection to them. It probably doesn't matter all that much. Okay. Or I don't like them either. Okay. But what you could say, hey, I really want to get back to, in a previous video with someone else, dancing, or I don't know, walking much further, or the gym, or an extra, I don't know what it is, right? So maybe you share with me, hey, what are like a few things, right, that you're like, hey, I'm not really like, I'm still kind of avoidant. I'm still on this side, right, over here, right, kind of avoidant of this thing, but I want to be able to get back to it. And then what we'll do is this, okay? What we'll do, well, let's just start with that. Give me a list of a couple things in your brain.
The stairs.
Cool. I thought you were
48 stairs.
Got it. Okay, steps.
Plus 6 outside. And the walking.
Cool.
I have found going up the stairs in some of a different pattern seemed to work. And I was able to go up the stairs the normal way if I don't go walking first.
Okay, cool. All right. So these are the things you need to get back to, you want to get back to, and probably walking, you would probably enjoy doing it. Is that fair? Cool.
Well, I was doing like 3.5 miles a day.
Got it. What are you doing now? 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a mile? What's happening?
Well, I was doing 40 minutes and that was too much. So I'm going to have to get it into the chunks, I think.
Okay. Okay. So you're getting there. Okay. So you're doing a good job. You're pushing up to it. Right. So what I would say is this. All right. I'm going to try to apply this the best I can, but let's just say, right, that we want to try to work in, gradually expose ourselves to these things, right, which are like, ooh, stairs and walking. I really like these things, but I don't know if I can do them yet, right? So I'm still over here. Can they go? I don't know, right? So what we start to do is we start to say this. Okay, we could do some strengthening, some clamshells and things like this, not necessarily to strengthen per se, okay, even though it's a sensation that you have is that it's weak. It may or may not be true, but just to get some work and build up some resiliency in that area. That's the way I think about it.
Well,
Okay?
and the way I was coping before was going up the stairs using my right foot only first, and then bringing the left one up, right one up, then the left. So it wasn't really getting quite the same workout.
Totally. Cool. So now you want to, now your brain is starting to say, hey, I think I can maybe do this, right? So now you want to start to think of it like this. How can I gradually expose myself to this activity or this functional thing, right? So I can get back to my goal, which is, reduce stairs and walk, right? So cool thing about this is now you just break these things down. By the way, anybody watching, this could be, hey, Charlie, you know what? I could care less about stairs. I don't have any stairs and I don't have any hills where I live or whatever. So maybe, again, like I said, I don't know why I'm on this dancing gig, but maybe it's dancing. Sounds kind of fun. Maybe it's ice skating, right? It doesn't matter, okay? You can put anything, the gym, it doesn't matter. You put anything you want here and apply the same concept. So even though I'm chatting with Pat, just realize like I'm chatting to you too, okay? So now let's talk about this. So here's what you need to think about, all right? So stairs, let's just call stairs this. Great. Okay, so now you're like, what the heck is that? Okay, this is a form, all right, if you will, some form, okay? And we've got, we've got one shape here, right? It's kind of made up of a few different things, let's just say, right? You got one here, and then you got one here. All right. Now, if we zoom in on these things, right, we could say, hey, what makes up our ability to go up the stairs? How can I break that task down from something that's being like, oh, I got 48 stairs, right? And kind of this like integrated activity as we know it. We don't really think about it, but what makes up stairs? What do we have to be able to do to go up the stairs? Okay. Well, first things first, okay, we've got to be able to do some type of this little shape here right here would be some type of like single leg, I don't know, balance. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about it, at some point, unless you hop up the stairs like a bunny, right, you're on one leg, right? So you've got to be able to stand on one leg. Now you could argue balance is maybe out of the equation because you could hold on, but the idea is you've got to be able to tolerate standing on one leg at the most basic level at some point, with or without help. Okay, I'm making this like super fundamental, but you get the concept. Okay. Then what we got to do is we've got to be able to like propel ourselves, right? So we've got to be able to kind of, if you think about it, it's almost like a kickback. Think about it as in motion terms. So as you're standing there, right, and as you're here and you're here, right, and you're going up, you got to be able to push this leg into something, activate the muscles of the hip and the thigh and things like that, right, and get your butt up the steps. All right, so that's another thing. So okay, that's a motion. That's interesting. That kind of looks like a motion. All right, great, cool. So that's a kickback. All right, and then maybe the other thing is that you've got to be able to do a knee to chest. What do I mean by that? A baby knee to chest. Because before you even get to this point, this guy, maybe I put him in the wrong order, sorry. But before you even get to this point, Pat, you're standing there at the bottom of the steps saying, there's a step here and I got to get my leg up on it. Right? So you got to lift this thing. You got to bring it from here, and you got to get it up there. All right. What is that? That's a knee to chest. And then when it's there, then it's a kickback because you're propelling yourself into it. So then you can go up to the next level. So you start to say, cool. So unless I can individually, now break these out, unless I have a knee to chest, a kickback and a single leg type of thing, color them in, right? Like you get the idea, right? Then guess what? You're going to have a hard time going upstairs, my friend. Okay.
Mhm.
So you can't do it in the beginning because you've got to be a little bit avoidant. But now if you're at the point where like, I'm in the point where I can start to expose myself to it, we start to say, how could we make strength more meaningful for Pat? Well, where does Pat's brain right now feel safe? Could we make a kickback a strengthening move? Yeah, absolutely. You could make a kickback a strengthening move, right? You could say, hey, and by the way, it's kind of similar to what you're doing in the back bend a little bit, but from below. Instead of bending the trunk back, you're just bending from below. Cool. So you've got that, but then you're like, well, maybe I can't do it standing. Maybe I don't like standing. Well, guess what? No problem. You can do it. You can do it on all fours, and you can start to kick your leg up. So you can just manipulate the position of this thing, this form on your belly. On your back, guess what on back is? It's a bridge. Standing, it's a kickback. You can go all fours, right? This person has a head, it'll make a lot more sense, right? And you're looking at the floor, right? And your leg is going up. So the idea is then you can start to say, can I find a yummy kickback to start strengthening or working into that? Yeah, now here's where you'd go next level ninja, okay? You'd start to say, well, is everything about stair climbing yucky? Is this the yucky component of going upstairs where I have to raise my leg up? Can I get even more specific? Or is that okay? Or is it when I have to push, I have to load and propel myself? Or is it when I'm just standing on the one leg and I'm not really pushing yet, I just shift my weight onto it? So then you start to say, which one is potentially the biggest mover? Meaning if I improve this, right, it really helps me. But maybe right now, like even though this is a component of stairs, Charlie, this one doesn't really matter. It's not too bad. And you know what? This one I could care less because I've been fine with that.
Well, for me, it's the propel because that's where I feel it.
Cool. Good. Okay. So now you start to say, Charlie, this one. Great. Now you're getting super smart. Okay. So now, well, that is the kickback basically. Okay. So now you start to say, huh, this is good stuff, Pat. You're pulling good stuff out of me. Okay. So now you start to say this. On the level of exposure, as it relates to, I could go really hardcore and aggressive at this. I could go 0 to 100 right into trying to improve this propelling problem. Okay. And how would you do that? Well, it would probably look like you go ahead and you just start trying step ups on that leg. Just see if you can do 10 reps every couple, I don't know, three times a day, or just a little bit, not to strengthen you yet, just to say, oh, I can do that. It's not too bad. Now that's the most aggressive way because it looks most like the activity and feels like it to your brain and your body. Your brain starts to say, whoop, 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 whoop. I don't know about that. I don't know about this thing. You're trying to pull a fast one on me, aren't you? And you're like, yeah, I can't really fool you, can I, body? Cool. Okay. So then what you start to say is, all right, so maybe that's a little bit too threatening. Maybe I can't do that, but maybe you could. So look, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's a sliding scale of least aggressive to most aggressive. We're trying to say, where can we plant Pat to start doing things that will get her back to it? This is going to be most aggressive or somewhere around there, doing the actual thing. Because there's nothing wrong with, you could say, Charlie, I'm having trouble with the propulsion phase. In the beginning, I had to avoid it, but now I feel like I could actually do it. And I'm just going to start doing it little by little and build it up. That is one super simple way to do it. But it also has maybe, this isn't to make you fearful emotion, but it has maybe the highest risk if you want to consider that involved. It's the most threatening to the system. All right. So what you could do is you could say, hey, well, maybe I can't do that, but maybe I'll just start. How can we do this? So propulsion is you planting the leg and then pushing off.
Yeah.
Right. So what you could say is maybe we could just start, and this is where it's cool because you could literally just make this up. There's nothing special about this. You could just say, okay, what's kind of a way that I could do a mini propulsions? So you could simply just say, hey, a step is going to be about 7 inches tall. Well, guess what? I have a phone book that's like 3 inches. Could I just lower the demand? You know, one way to look at it would be like, could I just lower the demand and just do a little step? Yeah, totally. You can just do mini step ups. Hey, can I do that? Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Okay. Well, guess what happens? Next week, this thing grows and then it's a little bit bigger. You put a couple more magazines on it, or you put a couple books or whatever. Okay. And then before you know it, I'm doing it. Right. So this is again, this is a really simple way that makes sense to a lot of people because you're just reducing the demand, all right, of that thing, which is very obvious to you. A lot of people don't immediately think like, oh, Charlie, he like kind of like do. He like decodes this motion thing and breaks into this and this and this, right? If you're trying to get back to something, people, you could literally just take the thing which is threatening and make it easier. Or you could do something even less than that. That's pretty low on the aggressive side of things, right? So that's probably like, I don't know, maybe like down here. All right. But what you could do is you could say, what's kind of a combo of these things? Well, I got to be able to stand on one leg. And then the propulsion comes from the force of it. But standing on one leg can be a little bit of a challenge. So could I do something like this? Could I stand here on the one leg, right? And could I just start moving? So stand on the yucky leg. Could I just start moving my, it's your right leg that's yucky? Sorry, I'm trying to remember.
Left.
Okay, left. All right, could I start moving? If I'm standing on my left leg, could I start moving my, my right leg back while I'm standing back? And then could I move it forward? Could I just tap it on the back, tap it in the front, tap it in the back, and tap it in the front? So it gets you loading the left leg, all right, with a little bit of like balance involved and a little bit of force required to keep you stable. So you're not really propelling yet, but you're kind of preparing to launch, preparing to propel, if you will. Right. So what would this look like? Okay, it might look like this. So let's just say the left one, right? You might just stand there and from the side, you have a little bit of a knee bend, right? And you might just be doing this. You might just be working, or if you're like, oh, I don't like going forward. Okay, no problem. You just work on tapping back at 6 o'clock. Or maybe you go to the front and you say, I'm going to go 6 o'clock, but oh, this one feels yummier. Cool, but I still feel it working. It's still getting work in that left side. And then that becomes something where then you say, remember how we had these 3 different motions? Wow, we can kind of combine these things because there's a knee to chest. Holy smokes, we could get really creative. We could say, hey, we're going to stand on this left leg. Now that we've done this for a week, Charlie, and we're good, and we found a yummy direction to do this, and we're working this leg, now we can start to do this. We can start to tap back, and then we can start to go up. We can hold on to the railing if we need to. Now we can step back, and we can start to go up. Right, so now you're starting to get your body kind of is looking more like that and feeling more like that. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then you maybe go to a little step, okay? And that's where you start to just kind of step up, right? A little step and step up, right? And you start to break it down and make it more simple. Does that concept make sense?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is my tendency in the past would have been to do just the opposite.
What would you have done?
Well, I would have put I would have been putting the stress on the other leg to try to get the propulsion to go on the left. So I'd be standing on my right leg, trying to get up and down on the left leg, which that's, now that I think about it, didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's okay. Look, and here's the thing: you only know when you test. But the idea is, yeah, you were kind of trying to just go directly at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Push and kind of force it. Look, again, you can do that, but probably that was maybe too aggressive at the moment. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
Oh, I agree totally. It's like the light bulb went off.
Yeah, I'm saying this is how you want to start to think of it. You want to start to say, what is it that I want to get back to? Can I break it down into its individual? Think motion. You don't have to think as crazy as this or as in depth, but you just start to say, forget even if you know what they're called. Just what does it kind of look like? What are some different ways I could break this down and freeze frame it. Oh, there's a motion there, there's a motion there, there's a motion there. Great. So you now have some snapshots of some different elements that make that up, right? And then which phase of this thing do I have trouble with? Do I have trouble with all of, remember down here I had dancing, right? I don't know why it showed up like that. It's kind of cool. It's like dancing. Do you have a certain phase of walking that's yucky? Because then you're going to want to start thinking of the same things. And here's the thing. The cool thing about it is this, right? Is that if you think about it, they're not all that dissimilar. Stairs are, you know, if I had to put this on like a difficulty rating, all right? Oh, actually, you know what? Give me a second, right? Amount of strength required, low, high. Difficulty of activity, low, high. Sleep, not much, okay? Walking, a little bit more. Climbing stairs, notice that one's just a little bit up probably from the other as far as force or strength required, horsepower needed to do it, right? And then obviously you got jogging and jumping and I don't know, whatever you got, it just keeps going up over time. Or yeah, it keeps going in that upper right direction. So that being said, the cool thing about walking and climbing stairs is that probably if you improve one of them, like they're very similar elements. You've got to be able to stand on the leg. So you're kind of like going forward with the leg, kind of a leg raise instead of a knee to chest, but you're kind of stretching the one leg out. Then you're accepting load on it. Then you're propelling. You're pushing yourself back, right? You could argue there's a little bit of a trunk twist more so in there, right? So you would start to do this whole, I don't know, like Lego, you know, where is it? You know, you start to do this whole Lego concept, right? And break it down and they would look fairly similar. Single leg balance, kind of. Kickback, yeah, pretty much. That's walking. You do a repeated kickback, you're going to go that way, right? And then you start to say, well, it's maybe not a knee to chest because I'm not really hiking that much, but it's probably more of like a leg raise where I'm pulling my leg through. All right. So very similar though. So I would still argue that you can get back to doing these things if you improve, you know, these individual elements of one, it'll help with the other. So does that make sense? Cool. So that's the cool thing is I don't think they're so dissimilar to where you have to be like, hey, I'm doing this thing for stairs, Charlie, but how does that going to help my walking? Or I'm doing this thing for my walking and they're totally independent and I don't think, how's it going to help stairs? I think they're kind of like one and the same, right?
Well,
like,
particularly since I have trouble with the stairs after I do the walk.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah. So the cool thing about that is it tells me something else. And then I'll leave you with this because your brain might explode. Okay. So what it tells me is this potentially, it sets off a little alarm in my head. It says, ooh, there's something that you're going to want to think about. Okay. So here it is, right? So what you're telling me is that like, discomfort or pain or inability to do things, burning, whatever you want to call it. Okay. The language thing. All right. Over time, right? The more you do, so this would be like, maybe this would be distance instead of time or something like that, right? But the more you walk, right, before you go ahead and you do stairs, right, the worse things are. So it tells me that there's some time component to that. What do I mean by time? Endurance. That's how you translate that. Okay, so, is there an endurance problem? So then, look, now you're going like 10th level, okay? I don't even know how to put this into a training because it's pretty cool, okay? But the idea is that now you're starting to say, Charlie, so I get what you're telling me. You're telling me I got this motion, right? Or it's an option. You're teaching me the concept. Now, how think of that, right? Think of that as like a little movement pill, right? So that's going to be your little pill is you're going to do that thing, right? But remember, in any motion that you choose, there's a dose, there's a frequency, and there's a timing component. So now the dose, how can you make it more specific? Specificity of training. At some point, if you want to be a good swimmer, you have to swim. At some point, if you want to be a good weightlifter, yeah, you can do cross training, but you kind of got to lift some heavy weights, right? So you can't really get around it at some point. But what you can do, and you don't have to do this immediately, but you would start to say, if this seems to be, I broke everything down, but now I have this endurance problem specifically, you can say, Would I want to do high repetitions or low repetitions of this exercise if I have an endurance problem? It's a
You
question.
want to do higher ones, right?
You would want to work towards higher.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I wrote prescription of just sometimes do 3 sets of 10. It's a good place to start, but it doesn't work for many people because it's not specific. Okay. So if you are a marathoner, guess what? You're going to want to build up your running tolerance. But that same type of thing might not work very well for someone who only has to run really fast 20 yards. Right. So I'm not saying it's not going to help at all, that you couldn't just do this at, 3 times 10. By the way, you want to start thinking, instead of just endurance right away, you want to start to think, let me just make sure it's safe with my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It has to pass the brain test. If it doesn't filter through the brain, all right, then you're dead. All right. So it's got to get through that first. All right. And you've got to say, all right, so I started small and I made my way through the first barrier. Woo, win. Now, when it comes to what the body really needs, the body, after I figure that it's safe and I'm good, I need to start now ratcheting up my endurance, because that's what my body needs.
Okay.
And then you'd start to say, hey, instead of just doing 3 sets of 10 of that, right? In the beginning, cool, I'm safe. But then you might be saying, hey, I'm gonna do like 3 sets of 20, right? Or you'd start with like 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 50. You'd start ratcheting it up.
Okay.
Right? Or I'm going to try to stand on my leg for like 3 times 1 minute and do this. Maybe it's not a repetition thing. Maybe it's a time thing. Because my guess is that you have a better idea of the time you can walk than the amount of steps you take. But maybe I'm wrong.
The time. Well, the time and distance.
Yeah, exactly. So time might be a better parameter for you, where you say, okay, so I'm going to start with, doing it maybe 3 sets of 10 seconds. I'm making this up. You could probably do more than that, but you get the idea. Okay. And then once it's like, cool, I've proven my brain that is okay and it's not threatening and I can do it. Great. You pass the litmus test. Okay. Then you're going to go and say, but what does my body really need? My brain needs safety. My body probably needs more endurance. The tissue needs more endurance. Great. Why not do now 3 times 30 seconds? How'd you do with that? Still safe. Still good. Right. But now it's giving me more of what my body needs, which is more endurance.
Okay.
All right. So that's how you'd kind of like break it down from whatever it is, break it into individual parts. Ask yourself, there's a spectrum here. I can go really aggressive. Maybe you can, but does it pass the brain test? I don't know. Or you can go really low aggressive and you can kind of, again, over time, you can build it up. Right. And then as long as things pass the brain test, right, and you feel safe and you start small, start to play with the dose and frequency to match that which is important to you and that which you want to get back to, which is you have a problem with walking endurance. You want to be able to walk longer. So therefore, guess what? The way that you do this motion is going to be one of more time, over time.
Right.
Okay. Is that too much?
No, it
Cool.
makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I mean, I had to shift my thinking, which is good.
Yeah. Cool. So that's the way I go. And again, like just for anybody else watching, you can do the same thing with dancing. You can do the same thing with ice hockey. You need to be able to move your leg this way, move your leg that way. You need to be able to twist your trunk and you need to be able to wiggle your arms. Okay. Or right. You need to be able to do a kickback and a side leg raise essentially combined, right? You want to start to think of what are my individual little Legos. If you're at the point, by the way, notice I'm having this conversation with her over here. If you're in the early phase, you're just doing straight yummy motions. They might not be all that meaningful to you at the moment. Okay. You're staying as active as you can, but if symptoms are really high, you're shifting pain triggers, calming stuff down. When you get to a certain point, you're saying where your brain starts to say, hey, I think I could do this thing. Right. Then you're starting to say, you're probably at a point where you're feeling a little bit more safe and you can start to confront that which you are afraid of. Afraid is a strong word. Fearful of, a little worried about, or excited to get back to. Great. Now start to break those things down. Right. And into the individual components. Again, ask yourself how can I get into this? Aggressive versus what's my conservative option? And then start to ask yourself, how can I go about doing it? What is the dose, the frequency, and timing that first is safe to the brain, and then starts to actually get to the body component of building up the tolerance so that you get back to life, right? So you get back to function.
Okay.
All right.
Wow.
Cool. So that's useful.
Very
good.